my husband will say, there are some good parts about being a stepmom. I'm like, I know there are. It's a blessing. I feel like God chose me.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also very hard. And sometimes he reminds me, he goes, you talk about how hard it is too much. Like, you don't talk about the blessing and the value that you add to them and that they add to you.
From the Family Life Podcast Network, this is Family Life Blended. I'm Ron Deal. This podcast brings together timeless wisdom and practical help and hope to blended families and those who love them. Have you ever skipped a meal? I did just the other day. I got to tell you, it was horrible. Just one meal, and my stomach started growling, and I felt weak and a little pathetic, to be honest. Well, if you're a struggling step-parent, you long for something to fill the emptiness. Recently, I had a conversation with stepmom and author Melanie Anthony about what she calls daily bread for starving step-parents. Like, what do you do when the stepmom scrutiny comes your way from the biological mother? And how do you manage when the rose-colored glasses fall off? Melanie Anthony is co-author with Laura Beth Hoisington of the devotional Daily Bread for the Starving Stepmom. She and her husband Steve and their 3 blended family daughters live in Austin, Texas. In her book, Melanie shares one of the prayers that shaped her life. She says, "Lord, I would rather be single the rest of my life than to settle for someone that isn't your best for me." So I asked her, why in the world would she pray such a bold prayer?
It was bold, and I was at a point in time when I'd actually been divorced for quite some time. I was actually divorced in my 30s when most everybody else, had families of their own, children. And the struggle was I desperately wanted to be married. And I fought that a long time through poor relationships, bad dating, some really bad dating. And I think it was during that time, they talk about the deserts.
Yeah.
That was a desert because I was single. And my dream of being married had been lost in a 4-year bad marriage. And it was gone. And I didn't know how to get that back. So I tried to do it on my own, which I failed miserably. And I got to the point where I'm like, I'm done. And I said, I only want what you have for me, God. I'll be single the rest of my life. I'm good with that. And I'm not kidding you. The minute I prayed that, things just started falling into place. I surrendered everything. I stopped dating. The focus became, it was just me and God. And I said, it's you and me, God, and I'm good.
And that gave you some peace?
Very much so. Very much so.
And what was different? I mean, what did life look like day in and day out, walking around with that sort of resolve that it's okay? If it's just me and God, that's okay. How did that change the way your life flowed?
Well, I was more confident. I had more strength. I could hear from God. And although I believe God places desires in our hearts, and my desire was to be married, I gave that desire to him. And then at that point, he's like, now I can work through you.
That's really great. I'm keying in on the word you desperately wanted to get married. My experience is when people are desperate about anything, it doesn't put us in a good place to make decisions.
No.
We're leaning out over the edge, praying for somebody to catch us, and we'll kind of take whoever will come to the rescue at that point in time. So that just leads to poor decision making, the inability to really see through the quality of the relationship. You'll just take anything, anywhere. It was that kind of the journey you were on?
It was. I was tired of making poor decisions. And because those poor decisions were leading me to a lot of pain, a lot of bad mistakes, and the consequences were hefty, and I didn't want to do that. I wanted to do it God's way.
Yeah.
And the minute I prayed that prayer, it was probably within 6 months, I took a job in real estate, and I met my husband, and I sold his house. He was my client. I said, I don't date my clients, but we'll go for coffee. But and he chased me hard, and I was like, oh, no. And he's like, because he was.
Okay, wait a minute. You went in 6 months' time. You went from desperate, I'll take anything, anywhere, anybody, made some poor decisions, to I'm at peace with God, to now a guy is pursuing me and I'm saying no?
Well, it was actually a 7-year journey.
Ah, wow.
So it was the 7-year journey. It started out, and then toward the end of the journey was when I said, I can't do this anymore.
Okay.
And once I made that decision, it was within 6 months that I met my husband.
Okay. So let's back up just a little bit and kind of bring the listener in on the circumstances of your life. You had been married at one point for 4 years, then went through a divorce. Did you have children at that point? Okay, no kids at that point. Then you pray this prayer, this bold, courageous, wow, big prayer, and then you meet Steve, and you guys begin to date. Does Steve have kids?
He did. He had 2 twins.
How did that enter the picture in terms of your thought process when you start dating him?
I sit here and I laugh because I had it all figured out. It's like, I got this. It was like, I talk about in some of the things that I write, I'm like, those rose-colored glasses were big and rosy. I'm like, oh, he's got 2 little girls. They're so cute. They're twins.
Okay.
And I literally went from being single for 7 years or 8 years to an instant stepmother.
Yeah,
stepmother.
Stepmother. It has a tone.
Stepmother. And I was 40 years old.
Yeah.
And so it was fast and furious.
Okay.
And within 7 months of the time we got married to the date, I became pregnant.
Wow.
And so a
lot was happening.
I didn't know what to do. It was overwhelming.
It was overwhelming. So how were you coping with all of that?
I wasn't. I wasn't. I was just flying by the seat of my pants, really, because I'm like, I got this. And no, you don't.
You do write that you had rose-colored glasses on, and they fell off.
They fell off.
So reality hit fast.
Yes.
Reality about Steve, about the girls.
We married, and the reality of the ex, the threat that I posed to her, the reality that, I really am a mom to these little girls, because my husband has primary custody. So I was a full-time stepmom. They see their mom every other weekend. So the reality of, oh, wow, this is really happening. I've prayed for this my whole life, and it became instant. I mean, I never thought I'd become a stepmom. That was like, I didn't know what a stepmom was. I didn't know the Brady Bunch. I had no idea the Brady Bunch was a blended family. I did not know that.
Had you seen the Brady Bunch show?
I watched it all the time growing up, and I never knew they were a blended family.
Which is one of the things I've been preaching for a really long time, and that is they convinced people that blended families could be just like biological families because of how they did the show. And there you have it. Like
exactly.
You did not know.
I had no idea.
And so that just goes to show you can romance anything into a notion that's not reality.
Exactly.
Yeah. But so your reality was crashing in hard and fast.
Hard and fast.
And you were overwhelmed.
Yes.
And were the relationships, I mean, how were other people adjusting? How were the kids adjusting? How was Steve adjusting?
Well, we didn't really know what we were adjusting to, except, this is a new thing. We didn't really have any expectations. We didn't know what they were. And so we were just going with the flow. But having to deal with, the ex, legal issues, things of that nature, put a little stress on the marriage, the relationships. The girls were really young at the time, though. So they're pretty impressionable at that time, at that age. So things were, I use this word very loosely, easy back then raising them. And so it was an unknown. We were walking into the unknown.
You just said something that is a truism about blended families, about most, not all, but when there's stress, and the stress typically comes during those hard integration years, it always ripples into the marriage relationship. And, that's something I repeat over and over and over. And if you listen to this podcast, you'll probably hear me say that. And the reason for that is I think people need to be forewarned. And if they've already experienced that, understand that that's very normal. It could be that a phone call from a former spouse all of a sudden creates tension in your marriage. Like, wait a minute, how did it get here? It started over there, and now it's between us, right? Or maybe it's a kid issue or a parenting thing, or maybe, has something to do with money, or it can be a lot of external factors that then ultimately ripple into your marriage relationship.
Right.
And you guys definitely experienced that.
We did. And it was I became pregnant 7 months to the day when we got married. I found out I was pregnant at 40. And I looked at my husband and I said, I am so scared. And he's like, well, this is what you want, right? Because I told him before we were married, I said, if you want to marry me, you got to give me a baby. So
he agreed.
I agreed. And so I said, great, but that was something that I'd always desired to do, is to have my own child. So we had a child, an ours baby, and everything, just kind of flowed, but it was still another dynamic because now I was mom.
Right.
Not stepmom.
And those are two very different roles.
Very different roles.
How were they different for you?
Wow. That's a loaded question. Because I feel like there are days when I put on many hats. The mom role feels so much more unconditional than the stepmom role, which feels so conditional. And I think it's so much about our perception, but it's harder. It feels like this cloud of scrutiny, ongoing scrutiny, whether it's something that I make up in my own head or my perception, and I'm sure it's my perception, because others probably don't feel that at all. Like my stepchildren, they probably don't think twice about something I may have said. But I think about, well, this may get back to the other house.
Yeah.
I'm not really your mom, so when I say this, it doesn't have as much authority or value to it. And so I tend to scrutinize myself.
Yeah.
Because
you run it through the filters.
Like all 25 of them.
Yeah.
It's exhausting.
It is exhausting. You're working harder. I think that's part of the experience of it is I'm working harder because you're constantly justifying yourself. Like, okay, if this goes through the ears of their biological mother, how will she hear that and perceive that? And so what do I have to say? How do I say it? And then, then it's got to go through the kids' ears. But by the way, my biological child is listening in to how I say it, and I'm a little more direct when it comes to my kid than I am with my stepchildren. That may be affecting how they view me. Mom, why don't you ever say it that way to me? So those are all those filters that you have to pass it through as you're saying it. That's a lot of work.
It is.
You get starving, is the way you guys put it in this book that you've written. In that situation, what are you starving for?
I'm starving for somebody to tell me that I'm not crazy. That it's okay to feel this way. It's okay to feel like you can't figure all this out and that you are not alone. Because, stepmom 2 over here, she feels the same way. I'm like, you feel that way? Oh, I feel that way all the time. I'm like, I feel so much better about myself.
There's 2 powerful messages in that. 1, you're not crazy. This is not just all about you. 2, you're not alone. There's support, there's help, there's somebody who gets you, and you can share this burden with somebody else. Again, the book is Daily Bread for the Starving Stepmom. By the way, if you're a stepdad listening right now, hey, there's stuff in here that applies to you as well. You say in the book, the day you became a blended family mom was the day you started fighting the evil stepmother stigma. Explain that.
When you become a stepmom, nobody tells you about that. It's like before you have a child, nobody really truly tells you what it feels like. Well, when you become a stepmom, nobody really tells you that there's a stigma that goes along with it, because the ex-wife or the biological mom of your stepchildren, you're a threat to her. And you have to somehow learn how to deal with that perception that she has. And it comes out in really different ways sometimes, because sometimes it'll go through the kids. The tone that is set with the children will come then back to you. But that stigma of, just like Cinderella, the stigma is there of, I'm not evil. I'm actually added here. I'm trying to add things to your children's life, not take away. But what I represent to the biological mom is a failed marriage, a failed relationship, something that she didn't have, because my husband and I have a great relationship, although she's remarried. Right. And a lot of biological moms remarry. But I represent pain. And so I'm the brunt of it. I always say to my husband, I'm like, she doesn't hate you, she hates me.
Even in the best scenario, the best working relationship, you're still a reminder of a painful time in her life, if not an ongoing pain now. And that's hard to shake.
It is.
Can you think of a time? Is there a story you can share that just kind of conveys how you were dealing with how the kids were viewing it, that stigma from the kids or the stigma from her?
I tread very lightly in that area because they come to her defense all the time. So what I say is, I guess scrutinize is the word again. It just doesn't hold as much water, as much value. So it's tough to say that do I have a great relationship with my stepkids? No. Do I have a relationship? We have somewhat a relationship, but that intimacy, being able to talk to them about things like that, it's not there.
Yeah. How old are they at this point?
They're 15.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you have a biological child? Who is how old?
She's 10.
Okay. So 3 girls altogether.
Right.
In particular, when there's a difference between your biological daughter and your stepdaughter, do you find yourself drifting towards what's easy? That is, the relationship with your biological daughter? It's more clearly defined. You don't have to go through all the filters of what I say. And is that a natural drift, do you think?
It is a natural drift. And the way my stepdaughters look at it as unfair treatment. And I think that is such a good point there, Ron, is that, my husband is not a step-parent. He's just a bio dad. And so he's the father to all of our children. But when push comes to shove, he's on the couch with his twin daughters, and I'm in the other room with our bio daughter. And so that division, and I think we have to be really careful about the division in the home. It's a natural thing because Mama Bear comes in.
Yep.
And I'm like, come on, let's go.
Yeah.
And he just wants peace.
Right. Right.
And so then that separation begins. And then what is affected? Our marriage.
Sure.
Because we can't agree.
Let's unpack that for a minute. And I appreciate you sharing that with just such honesty and candor, because I think that's something a lot of people can really relate to. We don't have to go into all the details of how you get there, but I'm wondering if the process is something a little bit like when there is a stress or a strain that takes place within the home, that your husband who's, hey, why can't all you get along? It's easy for biological parents, by the way, to go, I love you and I love you. Why can't you guys love one another? They get into that caught place, that stuck place. But at the end of the day, if he feels like his girls are off by themselves, he may just drift that direction to comfort them. Not necessarily to oppose you or to make a statement to the biological daughter you guys share, but just to offer some comfort that they're not all alone in this. And your natural drift is back towards your biological daughter. And so there you have it. You're with one and he's with the other two. And does it almost feel in that moment to you like he's with them, more loyal to them?
I don't think it's a loyalty. I think it's I was just talking to somebody this morning about this, that I think there is, whether you want to call it guilt or shame associated with a divorce. And so you want to make sure whatever you do over the top, whether you buy them more things, which is not us, or you coddle them more, or you bring them in more, whatever it is, to reaffirm to them that they're loved. Yeah. I mean, I know I've heard of stories where, the weekend parent, whether it's the mom or the dad, they shower their kids with gifts.
Yeah. They want it to be a fantastic 2.5 days and no conflict, no real life. So they just give them everything that they ask for. But unfortunately, what you end up doing is you kind of stop being a parent in that situation.
Right.
Yeah. But again, what you're describing, I think, is very real. And it's not that anybody's necessarily I choose my kids over my wife. Or I think sometimes it's just that, I don't know what else to do. It just feels like somehow the girls are all alone, and so I'm just kind of hanging with them to let them know we still love them, they're still cared for. I want my girls to still feel like they're around and they want to be a part of our home. And yet that adds some stress to your marriage. It adds a little stress to your relationship to your stepdaughters. Dad's on our side, but you're kind of on the other side. I even wonder about the step-sibling relationship, like your stepdaughters and your biological daughter. Does that end up affecting them?
Oh, I'm so glad you mentioned that. That is our number one struggle, It's sad when a child is involved in a divorce because it's a loss, it's heartbreaking. And people focus on the children of divorce as they should. But what I think gets neglected are the children that are brought into the marriage naturally.
The ours baby.
The ours baby. They just think that they just go into the fold, and they don't. We struggle greatly with that. The relationship with the steps and the bio. And it is the number one issue that we have in our marriage. Whether one's parenting the other too soft or too hard, or whether you don't understand that, you need to discipline this one. No, I don't, because it just, what is fair, what isn't fair. And the ours child, all she says to me is, I just want to feel apart.
Yeah.
Because it's not very often you have twins, but because my stepdaughters are twins, they're twins. They're close.
They have a close bond.
They have a close bond, and that's great. But that close bond alienates my daughter, and it causes a lot of friction and a lot of rebellion on my bio daughter's part.
Wow. Yeah, I could see what a struggle that would be, because your biological daughter is not guilty of making any of this happen, and yet she feels isolated. And alone in some ways, which just tugs on your heart, I would think.
That's when Mama Bear comes out.
Yeah. And you get protective. And,
very protective.
Which means you might have to be more critical of the other side, if you will, your stepdaughters.
Right.
And then maybe your husband indirectly, because he's kind of over there with them.
And it's exhausting.
It is.
And my husband will say, there are some good parts about being a stepmom. I'm like, I know there are. It's a blessing. I feel like God chose me. But it's also very hard. And sometimes he reminds me, he goes, you talk about how hard it is too much. Like you don't talk about the blessing and the value that you add to them and that they add to you. Because sometimes you get so caught up in all of the emotion of it all, because it is a lot of emotion.
And what's not going right.
Because
that's always where your focus of attention is. Because you want those things to improve. And so, we naturally give a lot of time and energy to what's not going well rather than recognizing what is okay. I think that's a good word. And yet the everyday experience is we're hurting about this. And here's some pain over here. And that constantly draws our attention. If think about our physical bodies for a minute. If there's one little spot, in your back that hurts, or, you got a bruise on your elbow, boy, that's the thing you notice. Right? Everything else is working just fine, right? But you still don't feel like you're doing all right. And so that can be challenging.
Yeah.
So where's the hope? Where's the encouragement? Like, what are the things that you would encourage somebody who's listening, who's going, maybe it's not the exact same circumstances as you, but there's a pain somewhere in there of the emotional body of their family, and it's drawing all their attention. What would you say to them?
I would say that without God, you cannot do any of this. You cannot. I think blended families are God's pride and joy, meaning here's my restoration, here's my redemption. Here's a blend. Jesus wasn't a blend. Joseph, Mary and Joseph. Joseph wasn't the biological father to Jesus. So in the redemption, truly, comes from God only. And he's the only one that can make anything beautiful. So get connected to a church. Get connected to a tribe or a community of like-minded people that can walk you through the good and the bad and the ugly. And that have your back.
Yeah.
And that's really important.
Oh, that's really important. Yeah. And I would just add to that. Tell me what you think about this. Remaining persistent in the midst of the hard, I think, is really important. In your situation, for example, if someone were to just say, I give up, and they go into defeat, and I'm just going to live on this side of the house because that's where it's safe. I'm not even going to mess with trying to figure out the hard on that side of the house. That just means you get more entrenched. And my experience is then the other people get more entrenched as well. That just makes the gap even bigger. So the hard part is, all right, how do I lean into one little part of this and to see what we can do to make things a little bit better? Now, the caveat is So, for example, if you said, you know what, I'm going to make things better with my twin stepdaughters, and you can take some steps in that direction, maybe talk with your husband, figure out what you're going to do, and just that's one piece of the puzzle that you're going to work on. You can make progress, but it does depend a lot on whether the twins are even open to you making some changes. If they too meet you in the middle, well, man, things move faster in a better way. But if they don't, if it's a brick wall response, well, then that's just really difficult. And I guess what I would say to somebody in that situation is you got to pick another piece of the puzzle to work on. Just find another place where you do have a little more influence or power to make some change.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a good point, but I think expectations,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, especially if you can catch them before they get married, remarried, and sit down with them and say, okay, Tom, what are your expectations of Judy? Okay, Judy, what is your role going to be like? What's it going to look like? Because those unmet expectations are what cause so much hardship.
I think you're right.
And so that's really critical. I mean, even in the midst of a marriage, you can do that, set those expectations.
Yeah, if you can make those adjustments long before you ever get there, it helps.
And that's true. That's true. And I think one thing, too, is acceptance. You made a good point. The stepchildren are the ones that navigate the relationship and the tone of the relationship with the step-parent. And I also believe that the biological mother navigates that through her children as well, as to what type of relationship her children are going to have with their stepmom.
Which is a message to anybody who's a biological parent listening right now, no matter what your situation is. If your children have a step-parent in the other home, please, please, please give them the gift of your permission for them to get along with, to build their own relationship on their own terms, whatever that looks like, with their step-parent and step-siblings in the other household. You have a strong influence in their life. They will remain deeply loyal to you, even to the point of being problematic to everybody else in their world, at their own peril, by the way. But if you release them from that loyalty, then they'll still love you and be loyal, but they will also have the freedom to get along with other people. Let's turn the corner for a second. You, I guess you, at one point in time, played competitive tennis.
I still do.
Oh, really? That's great.
I played competitive golf in college.
Okay.
And then I actually had a hole-in-one last week.
Are you kidding me?
I'm serious.
Man.
I'm not kidding you.
Have you ever had one before in your life?
I have. I was 13, and I have my next one now. It's crazy. I play golf once a year.
Good for you.
Yeah, so it's pretty crazy.
I guess everybody can have a good day every now and then,
so
right?
I do like to play tennis, too.
Well, where I was going with the tennis question, I mean, golf's a whole nother conversation.
I had to brag a little bit there on my hole-in-one.
Yeah, no, that's really good. So I was just thinking a little bit about being a stepmom, and do you ever find yourself kind of hitting that ball back and forth with a stepchild, and you just feel like this is a rally, and I'm caught in this thing, and we are just going at it, and they want to win as much as I want to win? You ever been there?
Oh, been there, always there, always there. And especially teenagers, they want to be right all the time.
Oh, yes.
Right?
Amen to that.
You know that, right?
Yes, that's right.
And yeah, so being a teenager plus the fact that they're doing this with you is yes.
Infuriating.
It's infuriating.
And by the way, have you noticed, because I've noticed this in myself, when your child takes on that strategy of I'm right and I'm going to prove to you I'm right, that I dig in my heels a little bit deeper too. And now we're both trying to prove the others. And guess what that does, by the way? The listener needs to really get this. That creates a dynamic where you end up inadvertently helping them do more of what you want them to do less of. We shoot ourselves in the foot. Because when I dig in my heels, then they dig in their heels. And then I dig in a little deeper and they dig in a little. Now we're both pushing the other to a place of competitive tennis.
Right.
And so, part of the trick is noticing that, oh, I dug in my heels. I volleyed what they tossed, and I'm part of the problem at this point. How do I drop the racket? How do I step aside and go, you know what, I need to change my strategy. Rather than arguing to prove that I'm right, how do I stop that and do something a little bit different? It doesn't always become clear what the other thing is, but if I just continue to play tennis, so will they.
Mm-hmm. Humility is a really, in fact, I'll tell you a story. The other morning, I lost it, lost it. They all three walked out the door crying. And I'm like, this is horrible. And for various reasons, there's a lot going on. And that's about the second time I've done that. And
is that all? That's not bad.
Yeah, right. Well, I'm not really being completely honest.
Okay. Maybe 2.5.
Maybe 2.5. But I knew I had to humble myself, and I knew I had to apologize. I knew I did because that's what God would want me to do. And it wasn't, nobody deserves to be yelled at. And so I took each of them alone and I apologized. And my husband was in the restroom brushing his teeth, listening to all of it. And he walked back out and he goes, you know, that was probably the most mature thing I've ever, no. That was the most mature thing I've ever heard anybody do.
Wow.
And I was like, and to me, it just felt painful. It was just like, oh. But I was very sincere when I did it. But I was like, wow, okay. So maybe I am making progress, even though it doesn't feel like it. That's another thing I like to encourage stepmom is even though you feel like you take one step forward and 6 back and then a half step forward and then 12 back, you are making progress. It's baby steps. But humility is, and I'm not always good at it. But there are times I have my moments.
I don't know anybody who's good at humility, but I'm 100% in agreement with you that was the right move. And as hard as it was, it showed a lot of courage on your part. But my guess is it helped repair. May not have been instant. Probably wasn't an instant repair with the girls, but it at least gave you an opportunity to do that. By the way, I want to commend your husband for staying out.
He's yeah.
And here's what I mean. I think sometimes bio parents rush to fix and jump in there. Whoa, there's conflict between my spouse and my kids, and I'm going to jump into the middle of that, and I'm going to coach everybody on how to make this right. And there's no way to win that scenario. He kept brushing his teeth apparently, and let you do your thing, and that had to be a 1-to-1, and it would have muddied the water if he would have gotten involved with it. He may not even realize how important that was in that moment, but he stayed out of it.
Yeah.
Which left, for you and them to figure out.
He's my number one cheerleader. He's reading a book on stepmoms right now.
Oh.
I mean, he's like,
cool.
I know. It's like, he goes, I'm going to read this one now. And I'm like, okay, go for it. And it's just, so he is my number one. I mean, and that's another comment is that thing that I like to impress is if your husband's not on board, like putting you first and putting your kids second, then it's going to be tough.
Say, unpack that.
Well,
say a little more.
There's a priority of, you need to put God first. Your marriage is second, and your kids are third. And the hierarchy of priority it's scriptural, and God knows what He's talking about. And so when a man puts his wife above his children, not because it's not to spite them or anything, that's just the way spiritually he's supposed to do. He's supposed to be the leader of the house. And so when that falls into place appropriately, then there's a lot more peace and a lot more harmony.
Good. So give me an example. What does that look like for him to do that for you?
He will make sure that my voice is heard through him. We always make sure they know we're united. We're very affectionate with each other, and, hugging and kissing in front of them. We go on date nights. We're grounded in our church, and we pray.
Yeah.
And he's the leader. I mean, I have heard too many stories, Ron, where the man's not the leader because he doesn't know how to be a leader. And the wife's over here just hiding in a corner.
And I think what you're saying is, I would say that's important for all marriages. And his leadership, of course, needs to be one of mutual respect and admiration for his wife, building her up. I'm a firm believer that because of a husband's leadership, servant leadership, his wife should be more, never less. Okay, so we're not talking about that here. That's true in all marriages. I think I hear you saying that's particularly important in a blended family situation with a stepmom, because she's not going to have any credibility with her stepchildren if he doesn't help her get there. He's the one who positions her. Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
So those external things, like just showing affection for one another in front of the kids, spending time, carving out time for one another, that's a way he prioritizes you. It sends a message that, look, Melanie really matters. She's important to me.
Correct.
This relationship's important to me. Finding unity and trying to deal with parenting situations. And we talked earlier that sometimes you don't end up exactly in the same room. And so it's not easy finding unity. Sometimes that is really challenging. You've been listening to my conversation with Melanie Anthony. I'm Ron Deal, and this is Family Life Blended. We'll hear one last thought from Melanie in just a minute. Do you remember the portion of our conversation when we were talking about multiple filters that step-parents have to put their words through? You know, how all the people in their life are going to experience those words and the expectations that are put on step-parents? It's really hard to find your identity in the midst of all of those opinions. It raises the question, what is your identity? How do you know who you're supposed to be in your home? Well, I can hear someone saying, well, your identity is in Christ. Yes, that's absolutely true. Ultimately, your identity is found in your relationship with the Lord Jesus Christ. And you still have to work out your role in your home. And there's many opinions about what that should be. Your husband's opinion, your opinion, the biological mother's opinion, the children's opinion, your biological children's opinion. There are many. You still have to figure this out. One reason I teach so much about parent and step-parent roles is because this helps create solidarity around the role of the step-parent. It helps you figure out who you're supposed to be. So this is a process of talking with your spouse and trying to figure out what role you're going to play in the home. I shared that once with somebody, and they said, yeah, but don't you just lose yourself completely in that process? Well, we're not saying it's up to other people. You are a part of figuring out what this is. You see, the best self-care is centered in holy living, first and foremost. Who Jesus calls you to be is what will bring most honor to your own heart and bring you most satisfaction to who you are in your family and in your important relationships. And you have to decide with your spouse what that looks like practically in your home so you can move together in the same direction. A final thought from Melanie is coming up, but I just want to remind you, if you want more information about our guest, you can find it in the show notes. Check it out at the Family Life Blended page at familylife.com/podcasts. Please know that we love to hear from you. Your feedback means a lot to us, and positive online reviews are really appreciated. Subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you download your podcast. Just search Family Life Blended with Ron Deal. And remember to look at the show notes for additional resources. You can also learn about our other podcasts on the Family Life Podcast Network. And maybe, just maybe, if you like what you hear, you'll help us spread the word. Tell a friend, a family member, post something online. All would be greatly appreciated. Don't forget this weekend, Blended and Blessed, Saturday, April 27th. This event is designed specifically for blended family couples, and you may be thinking to yourself, but it's so close. How can I become a part of that? That's the beauty of the internet. This is a live stream event. If you happen to be in the Minneapolis area, we'd love for you to join us live in the audience. But you can just go online and register and be a part of the day on your smartphone or on a laptop, or with a group of other people at your local church. The website blendedandblessed.com will tell you how to do that. I hope you'll join us. Now, a final word from Melanie.
Early on in our marriage, I felt like I was on an island all by myself. And I know a lot of stepmoms out there feel that I must be crazy. I'm on this island all by myself. You know, you're out there raising your flag going, can somebody please just get on this island with me? And my husband will say sometimes, he goes, I don't want to get on your island. He doesn't want to be in my mind and experience all the emotions. So one thing that I used to say to him early on was, I just want you to get on my island. Just get on my island and know what this feels like, because this is tough. This is gut-wrenching. This is horrible. You're not a stepdad. You don't get it. I don't say that much anymore, but he tries to understand. And he came home, this was many years ago, he came home one day and he said, I had an epiphany. And I'm like, that's great, honey. Great. I'm cooking dinner. And my youngest is just a baby. And we get done with dinner, and all 5 of us were at the dinner table. And he said, I want to say something. And he turned to me and he looked at me and he said, I am so sorry. And he apologized. He said, I am so sorry. I haven't tried to understand more of what you have to do to run this family and to be a stepmom and to be a mom. And he just apologized. And he says, I'm on your island now because, he goes, I had lunch with a good friend today. And his good friend is a full-time stepdad. And he asked his friend, well, what is it like? And his friend said, it stinks. Because let me go on to tell you a story that his friend, who is the full-time stepdad, went to every single wrestling match. But who got invited to the banquet at the end of the year? Not the stepdad. And so when he said that to my husband, it stinks. It's rough. It's hard. The light bulb went off in my husband's head going, wow, it must really be tough. And so when he came home and had this huge apology, it was that empathy that he had for, you know what, honey, I get it. It's tough. And I'm sorry I haven't tried to understand more. And we were all in tears. It was a really pivotal moment in our family life and even in the unity of our marriage for him just to say, I am your number one cheerleader and I will do all it takes to support you through this role.
How did that make you feel?
Oh, I was just like, somebody gets, not that he truly gets it,
right,
but to be empathetic to the pain and the hardship, the challenges that I face, and to have grace for when I need it the most. It was just so comforting.
Melanie, thank you for being with me today.
Thank you so much, Ron. I appreciate it.
I appreciate you. The book that you've co-authored, Daily Bread for the Starving Stepmom, a great resource. I appreciate you being here with us. Next time, we'll hear from Helen Wheeler and Rodney and Lisa Webb about dealing with challenging co-parenting situations and parent alienation.
People get so caught up in the anger and the hurt and the frustration from the divorce. Maybe they think the other person is the sole cause of it. So there's a little bit of revenge that they try and do. And what better way to hurt a parent than by using their child against them?
That's Helen Wheeler and Rodney and Lisa Webb next time on Family Life Blended. I'm Ron Deal. Thanks for listening. And thanks to our Family Life Legacy partners for making this podcast possible. Family Life Blended is provided by Family Life and is part of the Family Life Podcast Network.